The sea never sleeps where I'm stationed. It only changes its voice. I still remember the first night I arrived at the lighthouse, how the road behind me disappeared into thick coastal fog, as if the world had quietly erased my way back. The lighthouse stood alone on a jagged cliff, its white paint peeling like old skin, its light turning slowly through the mist like a tired eye refusing to close. The air smelled of salt and rust, and something else, something older, like what had soaked in too many storms. Inside, everything hummed, not the machinery, something beneath it. The walls vibrated faintly, as if the structure was breathing in slow, uneven cycles. I told myself it was just the wind pressing against stone, but then I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, circling the lantern room, where no one was supposed to be. That first night, I tried to ignore it. I really did. I wrote it off as stress, isolation, the mind playing tricks in a place meant for solitude. But then the light flickered just once, and in that single blink of darkness, I saw something moving outside the glass. Not on the rocks, not in the sea, in the air. That's when I saw it. Late October 1987, 3 miles beyond the northern cliffs. The lighthouse stood alone where the sea never rested. I arrived just before dusk. Cold salt clung to my coat. Fog drifted across the rocks in long white trails, brushing against my boots like wet cloth. Above me, the tower rose through the mist with its pale light already turning. The old supply captain barely looked at me when he unloaded my bags. He only muttered quietly, "Keep the light steady." Then he returned to the boat. Its engine faded into the gray distance until there was only the ocean again, and silence. The inside of the lighthouse smelled of rust and damp wood. The spiral stairs groaned softly beneath my hands as I climbed. Every wall carried a low humming vibration from the lantern above. I remember feeling calm then, the kind of calm that only exists before something begins. My duties were simple: check the fuel lines, clean the lens, record weather conditions every 4 hours. Isolation did not frighten me, at least not on the first evening. Night settled slowly around the tower. Fog pressed against the windows. The lantern beams swept across the sea in slow white circles, cutting through drifting mist like a tired eye refusing sleep. I sat near the radio room with a cup of lukewarm coffee cooling in my hands. That was when I heard the footsteps, soft, measured, circling above me. I looked toward the ceiling immediately. The lantern room sat directly overhead, but no one else was supposed to be there. The steps continued, slowly moving around the glass enclosure above, leather against metal, one complete circle, then another. I climbed the stairs with my lantern shaking faintly in my grip, but the lantern room was empty. Only the rotating beam moved around me. Pale light crossed the fog outside. Cold air slipped through cracks in the glass. Still, the floor felt warm, as though someone had been standing there moments before. I searched every corner of the tower after that. Nothing. No open doors. No wet footprints. No signs of another person. Yet when I returned downstairs, the kitchen chair had moved, only slightly, but I knew where I had left it. The leg scraped faintly across the floorboards when I touched it. That noise stayed with me longer than it should have. Near midnight, I found the logbook. It rested inside a narrow drawer beneath the radio desk. Old black leather, salt stains along the edges. The previous keeper's entries were neat at first. Wind direction, supply counts, passing ships, normal things. But deeper into the journal, the handwriting changed. The letters became thinner, uneven. Sentences trailed downward across the page like they had been written during trembling sleep. I stopped reading when I reached the final entry. It simply said, "It walks when the fog arrives." No date followed it. I closed the book immediately. The tower suddenly felt smaller around me. The walls creaked softly in the cold. Somewhere above, metal clicked inside the lantern mechanism. Then came the footsteps again, directly overhead, this time slower. I did not climb the stairs. I only listened, around and around. Near 2 in the morning, fog swallowed the windows completely. The beam barely reached beyond the glass now. Everything outside looked drowned in pale milk. I stood near the lantern room, watching the mist drift below the cliffs. That was when I noticed the shapes. At first they looked like shifting currents inside the fog. Then one of them stopped moving. It stood upright, human, far below the lighthouse. I pressed closer to the glass. The figure remained perfectly still while fog curled through its body. Another shape appeared beside it. Then another. Their outlines formed and vanished slowly, as though the sea itself was trying to remember people. I could not see faces, only movement, soft human motion inside the mist. One shape lifted an arm, and for a moment I thought it was waving toward me. The lantern beam crossed over them. They disappeared instantly. My breath fogged the glass in front of me. The room suddenly felt too cold to stand in. When I turned back toward the stairs, something made me stop. The logbook. I had left it closed downstairs. Now it rested beside the lantern controls. Open, waiting. The pages shifted gently beneath the draft. I stepped closer carefully. Fresh ink glistened across the paper. I know what I saw. The handwriting was still moving, slow strokes forming words while no hand touched the page. I felt every hair rise along my arms. The sentence finished itself before my eyes. You are not alone here. The footsteps stopped above me then, not circling anymore, standing still, directly behind me. I could feel breath near the back of my neck. Cold, wet, like air rising from deep underwater. But when I turned around, there was only the lighthouse beam, rotating endlessly through the fog, and somewhere below the cliffs, hidden beneath the mist and darkness, something moved with it. November arrived quietly. The sea grew darker each evening, colder too. Wind pushed wet fog against the lighthouse windows until the glass sweated with salt and moisture. The tower groaned to the night, like old wood drifting underwater. I stopped sleeping deeply after the first week. The footsteps above the lantern room still circled after midnight, slow, patient. Sometimes they paused outside my door, but never entered. I learned not to investigate every noise. Out there, curiosity felt dangerous. The phantom ship appeared 3 nights after the journal changed its writing again. I was polishing the lantern lens when the beam caught something distant in the fog. A shape, tall masts, dark sails hanging perfectly still. At first, I thought it was a fishing vessel trapped in low visibility. But the sea was rough that night. Violent waves hammered the cliffs below the tower. Any real ship would have drifted or tilted with the current. This one did neither. It remained motionless beyond the reach of the light, silent, watching. The fog shifted around its hull in slow ribbons, pale gray wrapping around Blackwood. I lifted the old brass telescope from its stand near the window. The lens trembled faintly in my cold hands. No crew stood on deck. No lanterns moved. No flags. Only darkness. And yet, one dim light flickered near the center mast. 3 short flashes, then stillness. My stomach tightened slowly. I lowered the telescope and stared at the signal lamp mounted beside the lantern controls. Without thinking, I flashed the beam once toward the sea. The ship answered immediately. 3 flashes again, perfectly timed. A cold draft slid through the lantern room. The glass around me rattled softly. I waited for another response. Nothing came. The vessel remained there until dawn. And when sunlight finally pushed through the fog, the ocean was empty again. I searched every maritime record inside the lighthouse the next morning. Old shipping logs, harbor reports, weather notices. Nothing matched the vessel I had seen. No missing ships. No stranded cargo lines. I even checked older archives stored beneath the stairs where mildew coated the paper edges. Still nothing. But while searching, I found another strange detail. Several pages had been removed from the previous keeper's records, torn out carefully. Only fragments remained near the spine. One surviving sentence caught my attention. It waits beyond the beam. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, as if written while listening for something nearby. That evening the fog returned thicker than before. The lighthouse horn moaned every few minutes across the water, low and mournful. I stood near the lantern room window long before midnight arrived, waiting, and eventually the ship returned, closer this time, not by much, but enough for me to see the outline of ropes hanging from a mast. They swayed without wind. The sea below churned violently against the rocks. White foam crashed upward in bursts, yet the vessel floated untouched, like it belonged somewhere beneath the storm instead of inside it. Again the flickering light appeared on board. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. I refused to answer this time. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the ship's hull slowly. For 1 second, I thought I saw a figure standing along the deck rail. Tall shapes, too still to be human. Then the fog swallowed them again. A strange pressure filled the lantern room after that. Heavy, like deep water pressing against glass. I stepped backward from the window. The tower floor creaked behind me. Another footstep answered it. Soft, careful. I turned quickly. No one, but the logbook rested open beside the lantern controls again. Fresh ink spread slowly across the page. Closer tonight. My mouth went dry. The writing continued beneath the sentence without any visible hand touching it. Do not signal back again. The lantern dimmed suddenly, only for a moment, but during that brief flicker of darkness, I saw movement inside the fog outside the glass. Faces, dozens, pressed together around the distant ship. Pale skin, sunken eyes. Then the light returned fully, and nothing remained beyond the sea except mist. The ship drifted closer every night after that. Not enough to reach shore, not enough to escape the fog. Just closer, always waiting beyond the beam. By the 6th night, I could hear faint creaking from its hull whenever the wind died down, with shifting against invisible tides. And sometimes, very softly, a bell ringing somewhere far below the water. The ringing began before dawn, low, distant, heavy enough to vibrate through the stone walls of the lighthouse. At first I thought it came from a passing buoy beneath the cliffs, but this bell carried something unnatural inside it, a slow trembling hum that lingered long after each strike faded. I stood beside the lantern window, listening. The fog outside rolled across the sea in thick waves. Cold moisture gathered along the glass and dripped onto my hands. Then the bell rang again, deep beneath the ocean. The lantern glass shivered softly around me, not from wind, from resonance. The vibration traveled upward through the tower floor into my boots. One long metallic toll, then silence. The sound unsettled me more than the footsteps ever had, because the footsteps belonged inside the lighthouse. The bell came from somewhere below it. That afternoon a supply boat arrived carrying coal and fresh water barrels. 2 fishermen helped unload the crates near the dock. Both were older men with cracked hands and pale eyes clouded by sea wind. I asked them about the bell while we worked. Neither answered immediately. The younger one kept his eyes fixed on the water. The older man finally spoke without looking at me. You heard it already. Not a question. A fact. I nodded slowly. The old fisherman wiped salt water from his beard. Don't follow it. That was all he said. When I asked what caused the ringing, both men became silent again. Their boots scraped quickly across the dock afterward. They left before sunset, without another word. That night the fog returned heavier than before. The lighthouse beam barely reached the ocean surface. Everything beyond the cliffs looked erased. I sat beside the radio room, trying to ignore the growing pressure inside my chest. The tower hummed quietly around me. Then came the bell. Closer now. The entire lighthouse trembled with it. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. The lantern chains rattled overhead. I climbed the stairs immediately. The lantern room smelled strange. Wet stone, salt, something older beneath it. The sea below churned violently against the cliffs. But something caught my attention near the rocks. Ripples, moving upward, not outward. The water bulged toward the surface in slow circles, as though something enormous breathed beneath it. Another bell strike rolled through the fog. The ripples widened instantly, then stopped. My fingers tightened around the railing. The ocean below looked wrong, too smooth between the waves, as though another surface existed beneath the real one. I stared downward until my eyes watered from the cold wind, and then I saw it, far below the cliffs. A faint shape moving under the water, large, slow, not swimming, rising. The The lighthouse beam swept across the surface before I could focus clearly. The shape vanished immediately, but the bell rang again, this time directly beneath the tower. The glass around me shook violently. I stumbled backward against the lantern controls. For one horrible second, I thought the entire lighthouse would split apart. Then silence returned. Sudden, absolute. Even the waves seemed quieter afterward. I remained awake until morning. The logbooks had opened beside me at sunrise. I had not touched it. New writing covered half the page. It rings for the ones below. I slammed the journal shut. But another sentence had already begun appearing beneath my hand. Do not answer the tide. The ink smelled fresh, like wet iron. I stopped going near the cliffs after dark. Still, the bell continued each night. Closer, heavier, and whenever it rang, the phantom ship drifted slightly nearer through the fog, waiting beyond the reach of the light. As if listening too, rain covered the lighthouse for 3 straight days. Thin gray rain that smelled of salt and old metal. Water slipped down the tower walls in long trails while fog swallowed the cliffs below. The sea barely showed itself anymore. Only movement remained visible. Dark shifting motion beneath endless mist. I spent most of those days inside the keeper's quarters reading the hidden journal. I told myself it was for answers, but deeper down, I think I already feared what I might find. The book belonged to the first lighthouse keeper, at least according to faded name pressed into the leather cover. Edmund Vale, 1891. The early entries felt ordinary. Weather reports, maintenance notes, supply shortages during winter storms. But slowly the writing changed. Small details appear between the normal records. Footsteps in empty corridors. Voices beneath the tide. Shadows standing outside the lantern room. Each page grew more frantic than the last. Sentences broke apart halfway through thoughts. Sometimes entire paragraphs repeated themselves over and over. Do not let it near the light. Do not let it rise. The handwriting shook violently near the edges of the pages. Ink stains spread like bruises across the paper. One entry stopped me completely. The seer remembers every keeper. I read that line several times while rain tapped softly against the windows. The tower creaked overhead, and somewhere far above, a slow footstep crossed the lantern room. I tried ignoring it. My eyes returned to the journal. The final pages were the worst. Words slanted downward in cramped, desperate lines. It learns through watching. It borrows faces. The fog carries them upward. Then came the final page. Only one sentence repeated endlessly across the paper. Do not let it see the light. Again, and again, and again. The ink looked fresh. Still wet near the bottom of the page. I touched it carefully. Black stains smeared across my fingertips immediately. Impossible. The journal was nearly a century old. A cold pulse traveled through my chest. Then I noticed something else. The handwriting had changed again. Not suddenly. Gradually. Each page closer to the end resembled my own writing more and more. Same slant. Same spacing. Same uneven pressure on certain letters. I compared it against my recent lighthouse logs. My hands began trembling before I finished. It matched perfectly. The lantern room bell rang overhead without warning. One sharp metallic strike. I nearly dropped the journal. The tower groaned around me as wind battered the glass above. Then came the footsteps again. Slow circles overhead. But this time, there were 2 sets. I listened carefully. One heavier, one softer, moving together around the lantern room. The rain outside intensified. Water hissed against the windows like whispered breathing. I climbed the stairs despite every instinct telling me not to. The lantern room stood empty when I arrived. Only fog pressed against the glass. The lighthouse beam rotated slowly through the mist, sweeping pale light across the sea. Then the beam passed over something below. Faces, dozens beneath the fog bank. Pale human shapes staring upward from the cliffs. Their mouths moved silently. The light moved on. They vanished immediately. My stomach tightened painfully. I stepped backward from the glass and froze. Fresh writing covered the lantern control panel beside me. Not ink, condensation. Words traced into the moisture by an invisible finger. You are still writing it. I stumbled away from the controls. The room suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Then another message slowly appeared beneath the first. The letters formed one by one. We all did. The lantern beam paused briefly, just for a second, but during that pause, I saw a figure standing outside the glass. A man in an old keeper's coat. Rainwater streamed down his face. His eyes looked pale and empty beneath the fog. Then the light moved again, and he disappeared. Only wet footprints remained on the lantern room floor. Leading toward me, the fog stopped behaving normally after that. It no longer drifted with the wind. It watched. I noticed it first near the cliffs below the lighthouse. Thin white shapes lingering too long in one place, not moving naturally, waiting. The ocean itself had become strangely quiet during those mornings. Waves still crashed against the rocks, but softer somehow, muted, as though the fog swallowed noise before it reached the tower. I avoided the lantern room during daylight now. The glass made me uneasy. Every reflection felt delayed by a fraction of a second. Sometimes I caught shapes standing behind me that vanished when I turned. Still, night always forced me back upstairs. The light had to remain active, no matter what waited beyond it. The fog rolled in heavily after sunset that evening, thicker than I had ever seen. The lighthouse beam barely cut through 10 feet of mist before dissolving completely. I stood beside the glass listening to the dull hum of the lantern mechanism overhead. Then the faces appeared. At first they looked like patterns inside the fog, pale curves, dark hollows, but slowly they sharpened into human expressions pressing outward from the mist itself. Men, women, sailors, too long underwater. One face drifted closer to the glass. Its eyes were completely white. I stepped backward instinctively. The fog shifted with me. Another face formed lower beside the lantern beam. Then another. Soon dozens surrounded the lighthouse, silent, watching. I recognized one of them suddenly, a sailor from an old photograph downstairs near the archive room. His portrait had hung beside a newspaper clipping about a vanished fishing crew from 1934. Now his face floated inside the fog, outside my window. Older, rotting, but unmistakable. His mouth moved slowly. No sound reached me. The others began moving their mouths too, all speaking silently together. The lighthouse glass trembled faintly beneath my fingertips. I could smell seawater suddenly. Strong, rotten, like something pulled from deep beneath the tide. The beam swept across the fog again. For one brief second, every face became perfectly clear. Eyes wide, mouth stretched open, not speaking, screaming. Then darkness swallowed them again. My breathing became shallow. I backed away from the lantern room window. The footsteps started immediately overhead. Fast as time. Hurried circles around the lantern chamber. The metal stairs beneath me vibrated softly. Then the fog outside moved toward the glass all at once. Every face surged forward together. The windows rattled violently. I nearly fell backward, but the impact never came. The fog simply pressed itself against the lighthouse exterior. Waiting, watching. One face remained inches from the glass directly in front of me, a young sailor with torn skin hanging from one cheek. His pale lips moved slowly. This time, I understood the words. Turn it off. The lighthouse beam crossed over him. His face twisted instantly into horror before dissolving back into mist. I stumbled downstairs shaking. The tower felt colder than ever before. Every corridor smelled damp and breathing somehow. The logbook waited open on my desk. Fresh ink covered the page. They cannot cross while the light remains. My eyes lowered slowly to the next sentence forming underneath. But neither can you. The tower groaned deeply around me, not from wind, from inside the walls themselves. Then came a soft knocking far below, near the base of the lighthouse. 3 slow knocks, answered immediately by 3 more from somewhere beneath the sea. The storm arrived without warning. No gradual build. No distant thunder rolling in first. Just wind already screaming against the lighthouse walls like something had been waiting offshore to begin. The sea turned black beneath the fog. Not dark, black, as if ink had spilled across the ocean and swallowed what little light remained. I climbed the spiral stairs before midnight. The lantern had to stay steady. It always had to stay steady. But halfway up, the tower felt wrong under my hands. The metal rail was cold enough to burn. The steps beneath me vibrated with a low, restless pressure, like breathing trapped inside stone. Above me, the lantern room glow flickered once. Then again, I pushed harder against the storm pushing through the glass. The door at the top should have been locked. It wasn't. It hung open slightly. Cold air poured through the gap. Not wind, something heavier. Something that felt like the ocean exhaling into the tower. Inside, the lantern mechanism groaned. I reached for the control lever. Pulled. Nothing moved. Again, still nothing. The lever was frozen in place. The light stayed on. Unmoving. Fixed. Pointed outward into the storm. The mechanism that had always obeyed suddenly felt like iron sealed into stone. I tried again. Harder. The handle resisted completely. Then the lantern light changed. It did not brighten or dim. It simply stopped rotating. A static beam cut straight across the sea. And held there. The fog outside thickened instantly in that direction. Like something had noticed. Like something had answered. Far beyond the cliffs. The ocean began to darken further. The storm noise dropped suddenly. Not gone. Focused. A single rhythm forming beneath the wind. Splashing. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. I stepped back from the lantern glass. The beam still refused to move. Below the lighthouse, the sea reflected nothing now. Only absence. Then came the knocking. Not on the door. On the base of the tower. 3 slow strikes. Deep. Wet, like something striking stone from underwater. I froze. The lantern room vibrated faintly with each impact. Then the knocking repeated. Closer, from a different side of the tower. I moved toward the stairs instinctively. Another knock, directly beneath my feet. The lighthouse answered with a low groan through its bones. Something was climbing, but not the spiral stairs. The sound was wrong. It moved through the structure itself. Through stone, through salt, through time. I backed away as the lantern beam trembled slightly, still refusing to turn. Outside, the storm split for a moment. I saw the horizon. Something enormous moved beneath it. Then the glass fogged instantly. Everything vanished again, except the knocking and the climbing. He appeared inside the lantern room, without any door opening. No sound of entry. No shift in air. Just presence. One moment, nothing. The next, he stood near the glass as if he had always been there. Uniform soaked completely through. Old Navy cut. Faded insignia. Water dripping constantly onto the floor that never pooled. It was as though the water itself refused to stay. His reflection came first. I saw in the glass before I saw him. Standing a second ahead of his body. I stepped back slowly. The lantern beam passed over him. But he did not react to the light, only looked at me, calm, tired, like someone who had been waiting a very long time in a place that never ended. His lips moved. No sound at first. Then words arrived, delayed, like the ocean carrying them upward. Broken compass tide. The phrase hung in the air like a warning that didn't belong to language. I didn't speak. Couldn't. He turned slightly toward the window. Outside, the storm pressed harder against the lighthouse. Then he spoke again. Not to me. Through me. They are learning the direction of light. The lantern flickered once. The sailor's reflection lagged again, half a second behind his movement. His hand lifted slowly, pointed downward, toward the sea. I did not stop them, he said softly. I only forgot how to turn away. The glass beneath his fingers began to frost. Not cold. Memory forming on the surface. Shapes rippled across it, like something beneath the ocean trying to copy him. I stepped forward without thinking. The moment I did, his expression changed. Not fear, recognition. You are already part of the pattern, he whispered. Then his body began to dissolve. Not breaking apart. Unmaking. Salt mist rose from his skin like evaporation from deep water. His reflection remained for a fraction longer than he did. Then vanished last. The lantern room filled with a faint smell of brine iron, and silence, but not empty silence, Waiting silence. After that night, I began to notice it. The lighthouse was no longer still. It breathed, not visibly at first, but in rhythm. Stone corridors expanded slightly, then tightened, like lungs pulling in cold air from the sea. I stood in the stairwell and felt it clearly, a slow inhale through the structure, then release. The walls shifted with it. Subtle, living. I pressed my hand against the stone. It was warm in some places, cold in others, like circulation beneath skin. Above me, the lantern room gave a soft mechanical click, but no one touched it. The beam outside continued its fixed path across the ocean, still refusing to rotate. I climbed again. Each step felt timed, like the lighthouse was counting with me. Not footsteps, breaths. Inside the walls came whispering, low, layered, too many voices to isolate. At first, I thought it was wind passing through cracks. But then I understood. The sound formed structure. It repeated patterns. Navigation chants. Old sailor rhythms. The same ones I had seen in the journal. The lighthouse was remembering them and repeating them. The stone beneath my feet pulsed faintly. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, matching the tide outside without needing to see it. The lantern room door creaked open before I reached it. No hand, no force, just acceptance. Inside, the air felt thicker, like breathing underwater. The beam still locked forward into the sea, and for the first time, I realized it was not searching. It was aiming. Something far beneath the ocean responded each time the light passed over a specific point. A distant pressure rising upward. I leaned toward the glass, and the lighthouse exhaled behind me. A whisper moved through the walls. Not words. A count. 1, then another, then another. Each number aligned perfectly with the incoming tide, as if the structure already knew what was coming. Below the cliffs, something answered. A faint vibration rose through the stone floor. The lighthouse did not shake. It agreed. The radio stopped behaving like a machine. It became something else entirely. I first noticed it during a storm lull. Static filled the speaker as usual, but beneath it, breathing. Slow, close, like someone leaning into the microphone from the other side of the sea. I adjusted the frequency dial. The signal sharpened instantly. A maritime channel appeared. Unknown, unlisted. Then a voice came through. Not clear. Fragmented. My name? Static swallowed the rest. I froze. The voice repeated again. Closer. Correctly shaped this time. It said my name. Exactly. No distortion. No delay. I stepped back from the radio. The lighthouse creaked softly around me. I tried transmitting. A standard signal. Nothing. Only silence returned. But the receiver kept speaking. Not continuously. In pulses. Breath, static breath, then fragments of sentences. Each one describing things happening outside the lighthouse in real time. Fog moving. Ship drifting. Water rising beneath stone. Things I had not seen yet. Then I saw it. The logbook on the desk. Its pages were turning on their own. Slowly. In rhythm with the radio's breathing. When I reached for it, the pages stopped. The radio spoke again. You were inside the channel. The words were calm. Certain. I checked every external frequency I could reach. All of them returned the same pattern. Static. Breath. My name. The lighthouse beam outside remained fixed, but now it felt less like a light, more like a signal, sent outward and answered inward. The sea beyond the cliffs seemed to listen more carefully each hour, as if it had learned where to hear from and who to speak through. Morning arrived without color. The sea looked flat, too smooth beneath the fog, like something had erased its texture overnight. Only faint movement remained beneath the surface, shifting in slow, uncertain pulses. That was when I saw the boat. It drifted near the cliffs just beyond the lighthouse beam. Small, wooden, outdated, but perfectly intact. No damage, no weathering that matched the storms of the past weeks. It moved without rhythm. No tide carried it. No wind pushed it. It simply existed in the water, returning to the same position each time I looked away. I watched from the lantern room for nearly an hour. It did not approach. It did not leave. Just waited. Still, at dawn. I descended the cliffs when the fog thinned briefly. The boat was closer than before. Its hull creaked softly against the water, though nothing touched it. I stepped onto the rocks carefully. The air smelled warm for a moment. Wrongly warm, like breath held underwater too long. Inside the boat, untouched meals sat neatly on the deck table. Bread still soft, tea still steaming faintly, as if someone had only just stood up, but there was no one. Footprints marked the deck, wet, leading to the edge, then into the sea. No return path, only descent. I followed them with my eyes until the water swallowed the final trace. The boat did not move while I watched. It waited, not abandoned, pausing, as if expecting instruction. When I returned to the lighthouse, the logbook was already open on my desk. A single line had been added. It remembers arrivals. No handwriting was visible, only pressure on the page, like something written underwater. That night, the boat returned to the same position again, closer this time. It began as sound, a faint dragging along the spiral steps beneath me. Not metal, not wood, something heavier, something learning how to move without fully understanding weight. I stood at the top landing and listened. The lighthouse was breathing again, slow expansions through the stone. But beneath it, the stairwell moved differently, one step at a time. Pause, then another. The shadow never reached the lantern room. It circled endlessly below me, always one level away. I lowered the lantern carefully and leaned over the railing. Nothing, only darkness spiraling downward, yet pressure pressed against each step as it passed, as if something invisible was testing where to place its weight. I moved downward slowly, matching its rhythm. One step, pause, another. The sound stopped immediately. Silence filled the shaft. Then my own footstep echoed back at me. Delayed, slightly off, not mine. I froze. A second step answered mine from below. Perfect imitation. The shadow was learning me, not chasing, copying. I climbed back up quickly. The imitation followed, one step behind, then two, then perfectly synchronized. The lighthouse walls vibrated softly around the stairwell, as if reacting to mimicry. When I reached the lantern room door, the copying stopped. Silence returned, but I knew it had not left. It was waiting for the next movement. The storm arrived like memory breaking open. Wind screamed across the cliffs, carrying something structured inside it. Not noise, language. Names formed inside the gusts, clear enough to recognize. Old keepers, men who had lived and disappeared into this tower long before I arrived. The lighthouse horn could not compete with the wind anymore. It sounded swallowed halfway through each blast. I stood at the window, watching the sea turn violent beneath lightning flashes. Each strike revealed something impossible. Silhouettes standing on the water, perfectly upright, not sinking, not moving, just existing on the surface like it had become solid ground. The storm spoke louder. Another name, then another, each one echoing inside the glass itself. The reflections in the window no longer matched me. They showed older versions of myself standing behind the glass, watching from different angles, in different storms. The sea surface below flickered with faces instead of waves. I stepped backward slowly. The lighthouse answered the storm with a deep structural groan, as if it recognized the names too, as if it had been waiting for them to return. The wind paused suddenly. Absolute silence. Then all names spoke at once. The door unlocked without movement. No sound of metal turning. No pressure on the handle. It simply became open. Cold air flooded inside immediately, carrying the smell of deep ocean water. Not salt. Depth. The lantern light shifted slightly on its own, not rotating, turning, intentionally, toward the sea. I did not touch the controls, but the beam angled downward through the fog, lower than it had ever reached. The ocean responded instantly. A faint glow rose beneath the surface. Something far below was acknowledging the light. The lighthouse was signaling, not randomly, not mechanically, deliberately. The beam tightened its focus. Like an eye narrowing, the sea surface rippled in perfect alignment with it. a response forming. From below, I stepped back slowly. The lighthouse no longer felt like a structure. It felt like communication. And I was no longer the operator, only the observer of something that had begun long before me. I saw him during low tide, half-trapped beneath the tidal rocks near the cliffs, a human shape pressed into the stone cavities below the waterline. Still, but aware, the lighthouse beam crossed over him in slow intervals. Each time the light touched him, he moved slightly closer to the surface, not climbing, responding. His eyes followed the beam even through stone and water, focused, waiting, as if the light was pulling him upward one layer at a time. I stood above him on the cliff edge, unable to speak, unable to step away. The water around him trembled with each pass of the beam. Then he lifted his head fully during one sweep of light and looked directly at me. Through rock, through water, through distance. His mouth moved, but I heard nothing. Only pressure inside my skull, forming meaning without sound. Not yet. The words felt like they were coming from below the world. Then the beam moved away. He sank slightly again, but did not disappear. He was still waiting, always waiting for full light. The maps changed overnight. I found them spread across my desk in the morning. Coastlines no longer matched memory. The sea had shifted shape. Entire sections of water bent unnaturally toward the lighthouse like gravity had reversed direction around it. New islands appeared where nothing had existed before. Sharp, too precise. Coordinates marked in red ink circled the lighthouse repeatedly. Every route led back here, no matter where the line began. I checked older charts from storage. They had changed too. Different shorelines, different depths, different truths. The lighthouse was becoming the center of everything drawn. Even the compass needle in my pocket spun slowly when I held it near the window. Not broken. Correct. Adjusting. Outside, fog thickened again. And somewhere far beneath the cliffs, the sea began to rearrange itself quietly, as if learning where it was allowed to exist. The lighthouse grew quieter after the maps changed. Not peaceful, just attentive, as if every surface had started listening. I first noticed the whisper beneath the floor at midnight. It came through the wooden boards slowly, like breath rising from something trapped below the structure. Not one voice, many, layered, speaking in rhythms that matched old navigation chants I had seen in the first keeper's journal. I pressed my ear against the floor. Cold wood, faint vibration underneath. The boards pulsed once, then again, soft, like a heartbeat learning its timing. The whisper formed clearer, not words meant for living voices. Directions, depths, coordinates spoken in repetition. The lighthouse responded in kind. A low hum moved through the walls, aligning itself with the rhythm beneath my feet. I stepped back slowly. The whisper did not stop. It adapted, following the movement of the tower above it. A draft rose from the floorboards. Not air, memory of air, cold enough to sting my skin. Each gust matched the timing of the chants. The lighthouse was no longer separate from the sea. It echoed it. I realized then that even silence here had structure, and structure could speak. The change happened without warning. I was adjusting the lantern controls when the beam stopped mid-rotation, then reversed, slowly at first, then fully turning inward. The light no longer reached outward into the fog. It pointed down, directly into the sea. The ocean beneath it reacted instantly. A faint glow spread outward under the surface like veins of light waking beneath skin. Something far below responded to being seen. The water trembled without waves. The entire sea surface began shining from underneath, not reflecting the lighthouse, answering it. I stepped to the glass. The beam locked into place, fixed downward, as if the lighthouse had chosen a direction it would not abandon again. Then I saw movement beneath the glow, large shapes shifting upward, not rushing, ascending with certainty. The lighthouse did not warn me. It welcomed it. The walls tightened around me slightly. A slow inhale through stone. The structure was preparing for contact, and the ocean was already on its way. I saw myself walking out of the lighthouse. It happened during a reflection in the stairwell window. At first, I thought it was another keeper. Then I recognized the coat. My coat, The figure descended the spiral stairs below me. Calm, unhurried, it reached the lower door and stepped into the fog outside. Never looked back. I stood frozen above the stairs watching. The door remained closed behind him, yet the records of my desk already showed no departure. No second presence was logged. According to the Lighthouse log, I had always been alone. My reflection in the glass above the stairs lagged behind my movements now, half a second delayed. Watching me too closely, I raised my hand. The reflection copied me late. Incorrect timing. Like it was remembering how I moved rather than copying in real time. I moved again. It corrected slightly, but not fully. Something about me was no longer synchronized with myself. The lighthouse lights flickered once overhead. The fog outside thickened, and somewhere beneath the structure, footsteps matched mine perfectly. Even though I was not moving, the radio cracked open in the middle of the night. Not static first. A full transmission. Clear, sharp, a distress signal. Coordinates followed, then silence. I froze immediately when I recognized the location. It was this lighthouse, but the message had a date, one I had never lived through. Decades earlier, the voice repeated again, slower this time, describing events that were currently happening around me. Fog density, lantern behavior, footsteps in the tower. All correct, all present. The message ended with a final instruction. Check inside the tower base. My breath stopped. The radio went silent, then repeated the entire message again. Identical. I rushed to the logbook. Every line matched the transmission word for word, but the handwriting was mine. Not from before. From now. The ink still looked wet in places, as if written ahead of time. I stepped back from the desk. The lighthouse groaned softly, and for the first time, I felt time folding inward rather than passing forward, like the tower had already lived this moment before I arrived in it. The knocking began at the same time I knocked on the base of the lighthouse. I did not plan it. I only touched the stone out of instinct. 3 soft taps. Then I stopped. From beneath the ocean, 3 taps answered. Perfect rhythm. Delayed by only a breath. I froze, then knocked again. 2 taps. The sea answered with 2. A pattern formed immediately. Not random. Communication. Unintentional at first, then precise. The ocean learned quickly. Each knock I made was mirrored beneath the waterline. The lighthouse walls began vibrating softly in response, as if interpreting both sides of the exchange. I stepped away. The knocking stopped, then restarted beneath the sea without me initiating it, as if it had learned how to begin conversation on its own. The rhythm spread outward, not just below the tower. Every direction around the cliffs began responding, a network forming, a language built from pressure and stone and water. The lighthouse stood at its center, receiving and replying without permission. I backed into the stairwell and realized the conversation had already started long before I understood how to speak. The fog lifted one morning without warning. No wind shift, no gradual thinning, just absence. And when it cleared, there was no land, no cliffs, no coastline, no memory of shore, only ocean in every direction, endless, unbroken. I stood in the lantern room staring outward, expecting to see something familiar return if I waited long enough. But nothing came back. Even the horizon felt wrong, too far away to measure. The base of the lighthouse could not be seen from above, as if the tower did not rise from ground anymore, only from water that refused to reveal its depth. I descended the spiral stairs quickly. Each step felt longer than before, like the structure had stretched overnight. Downstairs, the storage room windows showed only sea. No land reflected anywhere, not even shadow of coast. The lighthouse was no longer near anything. It was suspended, isolated, but not abandoned. I could feel it still connected to something beneath the water, something that had replaced geography with intent. The walls exhaled slowly around me, a familiar rhythm. But now it felt like a heartbeat without a body. He arrived during calm water. No storm, no fog surge, just presence near the dock that no longer led anywhere. The sailor stood on the wet rocks looking confused. Not lost, disconnected. His uniform was old, but dry in places it should not have been. He blinked slowly at the ocean, then spoke. I remember storms. He paused. But not this. His voice cracked on the last word. He looked at his hands, as if expecting them to explain something. Then the water beneath him rippled slightly, and his body flickered. Not violently, softly, like reality disagreeing with his presence. He stepped back instinctively. I remember ships, he said again, but not water that hold them. The moment he said water, his outline thinned, like the concept itself was rejecting him. He tried to breathe deeper, but the sea around him reacted. Every inhalation matched a slight dissolution of his form. He noticed it immediately, stopped speaking, but it was too late. The lighthouse beam passed over him once, and he looked up at me with sudden panic. I can't stay if it remembers me wrong. Then he dissolved completely into salt mist. The air where he stood remained warm for a few seconds, then cooled, as if nothing had ever been there. The lantern beam changed direction again, not downward this time, not outward, but deeper. It cut through the ocean like it had found a layer beneath visibility itself. I saw at the moment the light stabilized. Impossible shapes beneath the waves. Cities, not ruins. Living structures, moving slowly as if breathing with the sea. Buildings curved like shells. Bridges that shifted like muscle. Towers that bent and unbent with tidal rhythm. Ships passed through stone reefs without resistance, as if matter no longer mattered there. The ocean was not empty. It was occupied. I pressed closer to the glass. The view sharpened unnaturally. Too sharp. My eyes hurt trying to follow it. Then something noticed the light. The underwater structures reacted, all at once, turning toward the beam, not as objects, as awareness. The lighthouse flickered. The vision broke for a second, but what I had seen remained behind my eyes. Even when I blinked, even when I looked away, the shape stayed, burned into perception. When the beam returned to normal water, the afterimages did not fade. Instead, they shifted, as if the real world had been adjusted slightly to accommodate what I had seen. I stepped back slowly. The lighthouse seemed quieter, but only because it was listening more carefully now. I did not remember writing the first sentence, but I saw it forming, ink appearing before my hand moved. The journal lay open on my desk, and the words were already there. Tonight the light will not rotate fully. I looked down at my hand. It moved slightly after the words were complete, not before. The page continued writing itself, each sentence arriving just ahead of my awareness. The fog is already inside the tower. My breath stopped. I tried to close the journal, but my fingers hesitated, as if waiting for permission. The ink shifted again. You will try to stop writing now. My hand tightened. Against my will, it continued. The lighthouse finishes what you begin. The words formed smoothly, too smoothly. I stepped back from the desk, but my reflection in the window remained seated, still writing, calmly, like this was normal, like it had always been happening. I watched as the reflection wrote about my own movements before I made them, describing my retreat, my fear, my understanding, all in present tense, all already complete. The lantern above flickered once, and I felt the lighthouse correct something in me, a small adjustment, like aligning a miswritten line in a book. There is no longer a keeper, at least not in the way I once understood the word. The lighthouse continues without interruption. Its beam still reaches across impossible distances, answering signals from places that do not match maps anymore. Ships appear in the fog when called, and disappear when ignored. No record confirms who remains inside the tower, but the structure continues breathing, slow, steady, as if something still lives within it. Sometimes, during the quiet hours between tides, footsteps are heard on the spiral stairs, measured, familiar, but never arriving anywhere. The lantern room light never fails now. It does not rotate. It understands direction without movement. The sea responds to it like an old memory returning to a familiar voice. And far beneath the surface, something waits just beneath full illumination, always close enough to be seen, never fully revealed. The lighthouse stands alone. Or perhaps it always stood with something else.